There is a floorboard under the president's desk that most people will never see, and underneath that floorboard there is nothing but air. 60 feet of it. A vertical shaft dropping straight down through solid earth, sealed behind a panel so ordinary that a cleaning crew could walk past it 1,000 times and never know it was there. This is not a rumor whispered on internet forums. This is a documented feature of the house where the President of the United States sleeps, works, and, if the sirens ever scream for real, disappears. Because in 1948, something happened inside the White House that the public was told almost nothing about. A leg of Margaret Truman's piano came crashing through the ceiling of the room below her, and when engineers rushed in to inspect the damage, they discovered something far worse than a weak floorboard. The entire mansion was dying from the inside. The walls were hollow shells of crumbling brick held together by little more than paint and pride. And what the government built to replace that dying shell, quietly, secretly, over 4 years, was not a restoration. It was the construction of a fortress wearing the skin of a historic home. So how exactly does a government hollow out a 200-year-old national monument and rebuild a subterranean military installation underneath it, in the middle of the nation's capital, without the public ever fully understanding what happened? What actually takes place beneath the West Wing in the seconds after a national crisis erupts? The seconds when the leader of the free world simply vanishes from view. And 2010. A 5-foot-tall green construction fence goes up around the north lawn. $376 million gets spent. The official explanation is pipes and air conditioning. Stay with this because by the end of this investigation, that explanation will sound almost laughable. Picture Washington in the winter of 1948. Harry Truman is 2 years away from the end of his first full term, still adjusting to a house that has swallowed presidents whole since 1800. He is sitting in his second-floor study one evening when he notices the floor beneath him moving. Not creaking, moving. A slow, sickening vibration, as if the entire building were breathing. He mentions it to the ushers. Nobody takes it seriously enough, not yet, because a house that has survived 148 years cannot possibly be dying from the inside. Until his daughter Margaret's piano leg punches straight through the floor into the room below. That is the moment the engineers stop making polite recommendations and start using the word condemned. A structural survey is ordered, and what the inspectors find is almost impossible to believe. The White House, at that point, is not so much a building as it is a controlled collapse waiting for a trigger. Wooden support beams, installed generations earlier, have been repeatedly notched and drilled through by decades of electricians and plumbers running cable and pipe wherever it was convenient, until some of those beams retain barely 1/3 of their original strength. The exterior stone walls are standing largely because of inertia and paint, not structural integrity. One engineer's report describes the building as staying up purely from habit. The decision made in 1948 is one of the most audacious acts of quiet demolition in American history. The Trumans move out entirely, first to Blair House across the street, and for the next 4 years, the White House is gutted down to its exterior sandstone walls. Every single interior floor, wall, and support structure inside those historic outer walls is removed. Photographs taken during the project, most of them kept out of public circulation for years, show the interior of the White House looking like the skeleton of a cathedral mid-demolition. A hollow stone shell braced from within by an immense internal scaffolding of steel columns and beams. Engineers walking through open space where the Blue Room used to be. Inside that hollow shell, workers pour an entirely new steel and concrete structural frame, effectively building a modern steel skyscraper skeleton, and then wrapping the historic facade around it like a mask. And it is during this exact window, while the walls are open, while the earth beneath the foundation is already exposed for the new framework, that something is added which was never part of the original 19th century blueprint. A second basement level. Additional subterranean space, dug below what had previously been the lowest point of the house, deep enough and reinforced enough to serve a purpose far beyond storage. Every piece of the original interior, the plaster, the moldings, the historic woodwork that could be salvaged, is numbered, cataloged, and stored, so that when it is eventually reinstalled inside the new steel frame, the illusion of continuity is complete. Visitors touring the White House today are, in a very literal sense, walking through a museum-quality skin wrapped around a 1952 skyscraper skeleton. The wood may be original. The bones underneath it are not. The reconstruction is completed in 1952, and Truman moves back into a house that looks, from the North Lawn, almost identical to the one he left. But it is not the same building. It is a modern steel structure disguised as a historic one, and buried in its foundation is a below-ground level built with a level of reinforcement that has nothing to do with humidity control or filing cabinets. The men who oversaw that reconstruction rarely spoke about it publicly, and the project itself received a fraction of the press coverage its scale deserved, in part because post-war Washington had little appetite for stories about the president's house being unsafe to live in. A structurally condemned White House was not a story the government wanted competing for headlines against the early years of the Cold War. So the story that reached most Americans was simple. The White House got a modern facelift. The story that stayed buried was that the facelift came with a fortress underneath it. 10 years pass. The Cold War stops being an abstraction and becomes something you can set a clock to. It is October of 1962, and John F. Kennedy is being told that Soviet nuclear missiles have been photographed 90 miles from Florida, capable of reaching Washington in a flight time measured in minutes. Some estimates given to the president at the time cite a warning window as short as 15 minutes between launch detection and impact. 15 minutes is not enough time to evacuate a president by car. It is barely enough time to get him out of the chair he is sitting in. This is the atmosphere in which the shaft beneath the Oval Office takes on its final, chilling form. A fortified, pressurized escape route descending some 60 feet into the earth, engineered to move the president from his desk to a hardened lower level fast enough to survive the first 15 minutes of a nuclear exchange. It is built quietly, discussed even more quietly, and it is still there. Because here is the detail that should stop you cold. The fortress built into the 1948 reconstruction was never decommissioned. It was upgraded, which means the real question was never whether something exists beneath that historic floor. The real question is what has been added down there in the 70 years since. And the answer starts with a Tuesday morning in September that changed the entire architecture of American secrecy. It is 8:55 in the morning on September the 11th, 2001, and Vice President Dick Cheney is in his West Wing office when his Secret Service detail makes a decision that overrides every rule of protocol and personal dignity in an instant. Agents do not ask him to walk. They do not ask him to hurry. According to Cheney's own later account, he is physically picked up under the arms mid-sentence and moved, carried, not escorted, toward a stairwell most White House staff will never see in their entire careers. That stairwell descends into cold, unadorned concrete, a passage that feels less like part of a historic mansion and more like the access corridor of a submarine. At the bottom sits the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, known by its acronym PEOC, a fortified bunker complex built generations earlier beneath the East Wing and hardened repeatedly since. The blast doors sealing its entrance are built to a scale that has nothing to do with a home office. Multi-ton steel, designed to withstand overpressure from a nearby detonation, closing behind Cheney with a finality that turns the morning's chaos into something almost silent. Inside, the atmosphere itself is engineered. Independent, filtered life support systems recycle the air, designed to keep the space breathable even if the world outside becomes radioactive or chemically contaminated. There are no windows, because a windowless vault cannot be blinded by an EMP-triggered flash, and cannot betray, even by accident, a single flicker of light to the outside. Communication lines running through PEOC are hardened against electromagnetic disruption, built for a scenario where every ordinary phone line and cell tower in the region has already gone dark. And it is from inside this concrete vault, cut off from the sunlight and chaos above, that some of the most consequential words of the entire crisis are spoken. Cheney conveys to military officials the authorization for combat aircraft to shoot down any hijacked commercial airliner still in American skies that refuses to respond. An order given not from a war room built for the scenario in some distant future, but from a bunker whose existence traces directly back to 1948's hollowed-out shell and 1962's 15-minute nightmare. Above ground, the world watching on television sees a president reading to schoolchildren in Florida and a White House being evacuated in scenes of visible panic. Staffers running across the South Lawn, agents shouting for people to move faster, a building emptying itself in real time. What almost nobody watching from home understands is that the evacuation happening in front of the cameras and the operation happening beneath their feet are two entirely different responses, unfolding on two entirely different levels of the same structure at the exact same moment. For years afterward, PEOC becomes something the public is allowed to know exists, but never allowed to see. Photographs are rare, floor plans are classified. What is confirmed through congressional testimony and after-action reports is enough to make clear that this is not a repurposed storage room. It is a fully operational continuity of government command center, sitting beneath the East Wing exactly where 1948's engineers first poured the reinforced concrete that made it possible. Later accounts describe the room itself as cramped and utilitarian, a windowless conference space dominated by screens and secure phone lines, nothing like the glamorous war rooms of Hollywood films. Officials packed shoulder to shoulder that morning, running a crisis response for the entire country from a space smaller than a modest living room, buried under tons of earth and concrete, precisely because someone, decades earlier, had already anticipated a morning exactly like this one. But PEOC did not appear out of nowhere in 2001, and it was not the first tunnel dug in wartime panic beneath this house. 70 years before agents carried Cheney down that stairwell, another president, faced with another sudden attack, gave an order that has never been fully declassified, and the tunnel he built still connects, deep underground, to a vault most Americans have never even heard of. 7 December 1941. The news from Pearl Harbor reaches Washington within hours, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a president already living with the reality that a hostile foreign power has just demonstrated it can strike American soil without warning, orders something almost immediately that will not be confirmed to the public for decades. A tunnel, not a walkway. A reinforced, fortified underground passage connecting the White House directly to the vaults of the Treasury Department building next door. The excavation happens under a wartime blanket of secrecy so effective that even now, historical accounts of the exact timeline are pieced together largely from later structural surveys and Secret Service disclosures, rather than any contemporary press coverage. Crews dig beneath East Executive Avenue, the narrow street separating the two buildings, boring a passage roughly 7 feet wide, its walls and ceiling lined with reinforced concrete built to a wartime bunker standard, not a decorative basement standard. The purpose is twofold, and both purposes are terrifying in their own way. First, in the event of an attack on Washington itself, and in December of 1941, an attack on the continental United States no longer seems like fiction. The tunnel provides a hardened, concealed evacuation route for the president, moving him out of the White House without ever stepping into open air. Second, and this is the detail almost nobody knows, the passage connects directly to the Treasury Department's underground vault system, a repository built originally to secure gold and currency reserves, meaning that in a worst-case continuity of government scenario, the nation's sitting executive and a portion of its physical financial reserves could, in theory, be secured behind the very same reinforced walls. The tunnel is not a rumor confirmed only by conspiracy researchers. It has been referenced in Secret Service historical materials and structural assessments of the two buildings, and remnants of the excavation are still physically present beneath East Executive Avenue today, even if current operational use remains, unsurprisingly, undisclosed. And the White House tunnel to Treasury was never an isolated feature. It exists as one documented node in a much broader and far less publicized pattern of subterranean infrastructure connecting federal buildings throughout the Capitol. service tunnels beneath the National Mall linking government buildings for utility and, in some documented cases, personnel movement, along with a decades-old network of steam tunnels originally built for heating distribution that quietly double as below-ground transit corridors between agencies. Reports dating to the Cold War era describe plans for moving key personnel toward the Potomac River in a continuity of government evacuation, where riverine transport was considered a viable option if every road and rail route out of Washington became impassable or unsafe. So by the middle of the 20th century, Washington already possesses something the public conversation rarely acknowledges. Not one secret bunker, but a layered, interconnected underground shadow city, built one crisis at a time. 1941's Treasury Tunnel, 1948's hollow reconstruction, 1962's escape shaft, and 2001's confirmed operational vault. Every layer built in secret, every layer justified, at the time, as a temporary wartime necessity, and every single layer still there. Which raises the uncomfortable question that brings us to the summer of 2010. Because if all of this infrastructure already existed, why did the government spend $376 million digging an entirely new hole directly in front of the Oval Office? And why did it insist, for years, on telling the public it was nothing more than a plumbing job? By the summer of 2010, a 5-foot-tall green construction fence goes up around a large section of the North Lawn. And for the tourists pressed against the black iron perimeter fence beyond it, all they can see is a construction site. What almost none of them realize is the scale of what is happening behind that thin green barrier. This is not a landscaping crew reseeding grass. This is a multi-story excavation project, one of the largest structural undertakings at the White House complex since the Truman reconstruction itself. And it is unfolding in full view of the public while being described to that same public in the blandest possible terms. The General Services Administration's official explanation, repeated to reporters who ask, centers on aging utility infrastructure, heating and air conditioning upgrades, updated plumbing, modernized electrical systems. And on the surface, that explanation is not entirely false. There genuinely were utility upgrades bundled into the project, but the sheer scale of the excavation revealed by aerial photography and later reporting tells a very different story than a heating repair. Excavators dig a crater-sized not for pipe replacement, but for the construction of an entirely new multi-level underground facility, deep enough to require the kind of engineering typically reserved for high-rise foundations, not residential basements. Custom structural steel is brought in and lowered into the pit, steel fabricated to specifications suited for a below-grade high-rise support structure, not a utility trench. The project unfolds under a level of security more consistent with a classified defense installation than a home renovation, background-checked construction crews, restricted access work zones, and a level of operational secrecy around the project's engineering specifications that outside journalists were never able to fully penetrate, even years later. What emerges from beneath that green fence, based on later reporting and subsequent descriptions of the completed space, is a modern, hardened subterranean facility built for communications and intelligence infrastructure. A facility incorporating Faraday cage shielding, the kind of electromagnetic isolation used specifically to prevent electronic eavesdropping from outside and to protect sensitive systems inside from electromagnetic interference or attack. In other words, while the public was told about air conditioning, the executive branch was quietly constructing a next-generation, cyber-hardened command and intelligence node directly beneath the lawn where tourists take their photographs. The $376 million price tag alone should have been the first clue. Air conditioning does not cost that. Multi-level, Faraday-shielded, high-security underground command infrastructure does. Independent structural engineers who commented publicly at the time, working only from what could be observed through the fence line and from public procurement records, noted that the depth and reinforcement of the excavation went far beyond anything required for utility replacement. And some of the project's own contracting documentation referenced hardened infrastructure specifications rarely seen outside of defense construction. Tourists photographed the cranes, News crews filmed the fence, and for the entire duration of the project, the story stayed remarkably contained, receiving only passing mid-story coverage in a handful of national outlets before disappearing from the news cycle almost entirely, even as the excavation beneath the lawn grew deeper and the steel kept arriving. By the time the green fence finally came down, the north lawn looked exactly as it always had. Manicured, photogenic, utterly unremarkable. Which is, of course, precisely the point. The most successful concealment is not the one that hides a hole in the ground. It is the one that fills the hole back in and lets the grass grow over it. And once you understand that the 21st century's most expensive White House construction project produced exactly that kind of facility, the final and most unsettling question comes into focus, because everyone assumes they already know what a hardened White House bunker is for. Everyone pictures a missile silo. What is actually down there is something far more powerful and far more real than a button waiting to be pressed. There is a piece of pop culture mythology so persistent that most people accept it without ever questioning it. Somewhere under the White House lawn, the story goes, sits a missile silo, primed and ready, with a single red button waiting for a president's thumb. It makes for a dramatic movie scene. It is also, when you actually think through the strategic logic, one of the most implausible ideas in the entire conspiracy landscape. A missile silo beneath the White House would be, from a pure military standpoint, an act of strategic suicide. Nuclear command doctrine has never centered on placing launch infrastructure at the single most obvious, most watched, most symbolically important target in the entire country. Doing so would hand an adversary the ability to eliminate both the nation's political leadership and a launch platform in a single strike. Real nuclear command infrastructure is deliberately dispersed. Missile silos across the plains of Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming. Submarines patrolling unknown coordinates beneath the Pacific and Atlantic. Precisely so that no single strike, however massive, can decapitate the system in one blow. So if there is no silo, what is actually down there, 60 feet beneath the Oval Office, behind blast doors upgraded across 7 decades, and inside a Faraday-shielded command facility that cost $376 million to build? The answer is something that requires no missile to be terrifying at all. A hardened node in an encrypted digital command network, engineered to guarantee that a single verified authorization, issued from that exact spot, can reach the other side of the planet in seconds. This is where the nuclear football enters the story. The briefcase, carried everywhere the president goes by a rotating military aide, containing the tools and authentication materials needed to verify a launch order under crisis conditions. Paired with it is the biscuit, a small card carried by the president containing the gold codes, the authentication codes used to verify, beyond doubt, that a launch command truly originates from the president and not from an impersonator or a compromised communication line. When those codes are verified, what gets generated and transmitted is known as an emergency action message. A highly encrypted, tightly formatted set of instructions broadcast through a hardened, redundant communications architecture, a network built specifically to survive the destruction of any individual transmission node, including, notably, the White House itself. That message can reach a submarine crew beneath the Pacific Ocean, isolated from the outside world for months at a time. And it can reach missile crews stationed in underground launch control centers scattered across the plains of Montana, each of them waiting on a 2-person authentication protocol that requires independent verification before a single key can be turned. The infrastructure beneath the White House exists to make one single thing possible with absolute, unbreakable reliability. That at the exact moment a president needs to issue that authorization from beneath his own house, the concrete blast doors, the Faraday shielding, the redundant power, the independent air, and 70 years of secret excavation converge into a single hardened transmission point that cannot be jammed, cannot be spoofed, and cannot be silenced. That is what 1948's hollow shell became. That is what 1962's escape shaft was built to protect. That is what carried Cheney into concrete darkness on September the 11th. That is what $376 million quietly built behind a 5-foot green fence in the summer of 2010. Not a silo, not a myth. A neural network of command authority, buried beneath the most photographed lawn in America, hiding in plain sight behind a floorboard nobody is ever allowed to lift. The next time you see a photograph of the White House, the columns, the North Lawn, the tourists lined up along the black iron fence, remember that everything visible in that frame is only the mask. 70 years of concrete, steel, and silence sit beneath it, layered one crisis at a time, each layer built by people who believed, at the moment they poured that concrete, that they were protecting the country by making sure the public never had to think about any of this at all.